Thank you, Senator Scott. Senator King, please.
Thank you. I think, General Kellogg, the Germans would be surprised to be called feckless. They've made about a 180-degree turn in their orientation toward conflict and arms and armament. And I think clearly the United States has been the major donor, if you will, both in terms of military and humanitarian aid in terms of dollars. But I think I was in Munich last week. I think in terms of percentage of GDP, we're like 12th behind a lot of other countries, particularly Poland, which has stepped up in an enormously consequential way, both with regard to refugees, acting as a conduit for weapons. So I just don't think it. I just don't think it's accurate to say that the rest of the world and Europe is not stepping up, because as a percentage of their economy, they're actually countries that are doing more than we are. I do have a specific question about, and I think General Kellogg, you'll agree with me on this one, and that is, we go through these long debates about whether to send tanks, whether to send jet fighters. Then if we decide yes, as we've learned with the tanks, there's this long lag time, 3 or 4 months, that mostly involves training. It seems to me that one way to shorten that is to say, well, we haven't decided yet about jet aircraft or tanks, but let's do the training now. Does that make sense?
Senator really does train now with any system they've got in Prepare for the Future. I think it's there. So I spent 5 years in Germany. The Germany I remember when I was there, and it's been 5 years in there, is not the Germany I see today, both in leadership and their military capacity and capability. So I understand it's a harsh statement, but I stand by the statement as well. But you're absolutely right. If we can train them on all the systems that we may provide them, they're very smart, they're very quick learning, and I think it would help out.
Professor Stant, a question about, one of the things that's puzzling to me, I remember when this started a year ago, all the talk was the sanctions are going to cripple Russia. They're going to be just out of business and riots in the street. Absolutely hasn't worked. Talk to me about why were they the wrong sanctions? Were they not applied well? Did we underestimate the Russian capacity to circumvent them? Why has the sanctions regime not played a bigger part in this conflict?
So I think we always tend to think the first reaction to something like the Russian invasion is to impose sanctions. I think we forget how resilient that Russian economy is despite the sanctions. The IMF said that Russia's economy was going to contract by 8% last year. It contracted by 2%. They have been able to do this because they've had a smart policy of stabilizing the ruble, and because they have earned, windfall profits last year from their oil and gas sales. And they've managed to keep the war machine going despite sanctions. That's changing now. We have the oil price cap. They probably won't make those windfall profits anymore, but still, India has now become the largest purchaser of Russian oil, other countries, China. So they do still sell their hydrocarbons, even though the Europeans have now weaned themselves off the Russian imports.
Don't you think we underestimate other countries, particularly a country like Russia, their ability to absorb pain?
Yeah, I think we do.
They go back. He's invoking Stalingrad.
Yes.
And also, sanctions against a dictatorial regime, the problem is the dictator will always have his Mercedes and caviar. And so the sanctions don't directly affect, and if it's a country that doesn't have much in the way of political opposition, then I'm not sure where the sanctions go. Are there additional sanctions we should be applying now?
I mean, there's still some Russian banks we could sanction. We've sanctioned many of them. I think we also misunderstand the relationship between Putin and the oligarchs. I mean, and the people who lost their bank accounts and their yachts and everything else. They're not going to get together and say, we have to rid ourselves of this leader. That's not how the system works.
That hasn't worked.
Right. I think the only other thing I would say is that I think the export control sanctions will bite more this year, particularly the lack of access to semiconductors and components for manufacturing. So the Russians already started closing down some assembly lines with automobiles and things like that. And that will then hit the general population more. But so far,
that's where I want to follow up, Ms. Massacote. What's the status of the Russian defense industrial base? How are they going to be able to keep producing ammunition and weapons?
Well, we found since the beginning of the last year of war that Putin has delayed decisions that he thinks are risky, well beyond when he should have done. Russia has not activated its full wartime authorities to command that defense industrial base to really go 24/7. There are some sectors of it that are. My understanding is that some of their longer range precision munitions, they're working triple shifts to try to get those missile stocks back up. My understanding is that artillery shells is pretty simple for them to construct if they have the access to the raw materials, which they do. There is a bit of a delay right now. I think they'll probably overcome it by the fall, maybe the late winter. So in the interim, I'm not sure what they're going to do. I know they're trying to get it from North Korea. They're trying to get it from China.
Well, the big question, and I know it's been covered, I was in another hearing downstairs, but the big question is, will China bail them out? And is there a yes or no answer to that? What do we think? What do we think China's going to do? Are they going to? So far, they've been content to stand on the sidelines and hold Russia's coat. Are they going to actually step in and start supplying weapons?
I think there probably is an answer for a China expert. I'm not that person, but I would say that if they did intervene right now, it would fill a critical gap for the Russians for the next several months. I'm not sure if they'll do it.
Raises the question of what our response is to that. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator King. Senator Schmidt, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a couple of questions, but let me try to give voice to what I think a lot of folks out there who are not sitting in these chairs feel about where we're at with regard to this policy. They have seen an administration